I brought a copy of Biggie's autopsy report over here with me, and that is public information. It was released years ago, so I'm not leaking anything that people haven't seen before or that isn't accessible yet. But I wanted to go through it with you because, first of all, you were there when Biggie was killed. You
Yes.
remember that. Do you remember anything from that case?
Well, the only thing I remember is that when it was reported, he had been taken to a hospital, and that changes how we generally respond to those types of cases. So there's no reason to go to the scene because the scene's been destroyed. So we just sent one of our transport folks out
to Cedar Sinai.
And Mr. Garcia went out to Cedar Sinai and picked up the body and brought it back in and processed him into the facility. And then Lieutenant McWillie picked up the case because it was a high-profile case, and she created what we call a cover sheet or a Form 1. What we're left with is just Dr. Lisa Scheinen's autopsy report and all of the lab reports and consults, et cetera, that went through before they finally closed the case out with a cause of death.
And you talk about Lieutenant McWillie. What was her position? She's not a homicide detective. She is a detective with the coroner.
She's an investigator supervisor with the LA County Coroner. We use titles such as lieutenant and captain with our upper level supervisory staff, only because when we take phone calls from like law enforcement and you say, this is Lieutenant McWillie, they know exactly where they're talking to in the organization.
So what does Biggie's autopsy report tell you?
Primarily, it tells us what his final cause of death was and the opinion of the pathologist who did the examination.
And his report is 97 pages long. Is that standard?
No, that is not standard. That's a long one.
Why would this one have been longer, do you think?
Probably because of the circumstances surrounding. When you have somebody, it's not one-on-one known combatants with each other. When people just suddenly get shot, assassinated, whatever you want to call it, that changes the complexion a little bit. And so you want to do more rather than less. And that's why sometimes doctors will order things that may be on a routine homicide, if there is such a thing, but on a routine homicide, they may not do X, Y, Z. But for something like this, when somebody is shot out of the blue like that, they'll say, oh no, pull out all the stops. We're going to look at everything here.
Okay. Well, why don't you go through it and just tell me what you see. It's tough to handle this in a respectful way and to not seem exploitative, but I also know people are interested in knowing the specifics about, especially a case like this one.
All right. Well, the final cause of death was established as a gunshot wound to the abdomen-chest. And the other conditions, which is things that might not directly relate to the death of the person in terms of what was fatal, they indicate that there was a multiple non-fatal wounds on the body. And then in the autopsy report, Dr. Scheinen will break that down, and depending on how many projectiles she recovers at autopsy, she'll identify each one, where it was recovered from, and then also outline what was damaged by that bullet, because bullets sometimes travel through other organs and do a lot of damage on their way to their final destination.
Sure.
So she's got multiple gunshot wounds. The fourth gunshot wound is an abdomen to chest trajectory, penetrating and deemed to be the fatal wound. So perforating injuries to things like the ascending colon, the liver, right hemidiaphragm, pericardium, heart and upper lobe of the left lung, and the bullet was recovered from the left shoulder area.
Yeah, so that's hard to survive that.
Yeah. And again, I said earlier, the bullets don't always go straight to the kill zone.
Right.
They travel through things, and sometimes the traveling through will increase the lethality of the gunshot wound rather than its final destination.
Sure.
And then she goes on into other findings, and these are mostly, natural death types of things, morbid obesity, I mean, if that's stuff you want to get into.
Yeah, he was 395 pounds, it says,
Yeah.
at the end there.
Cardiomegaly with biventricular hypertrophy,
What does that mean?
enlarged heart. Status post left femoral fracture with placement of orthopedic rod remote.
Yeah, so he was in a serious car accident about 6 months before he was killed. And they had to put a rod in his leg from that. So that's why in his that last night he was alive, he was walking with a cane for that reason. He wasn't very mobile. I think the doctors said that they figured he died within a couple minutes probably of being shot based on the wounds that, he was probably already dead by the time they brought him to the hospital. And he was declared dead pretty shortly thereafter. I mean, they worked on him, but
Right.
within like 30 minutes of the shooting, he was declared dead. So it was not much they could do for him.
Right. The best people on the planet.
Yeah.
Emergency room staff.
Right.
They work their butts off for you.
There are some photos of Biggie after he was killed that are online. I have all of his autopsy photos, or a bunch of them. I would never share them. But I think some of the ones that are online, they show still some of the tubes from the hospital still, taped to his face and stuff like that. Why would that still be on there when it comes to you?
Well, the coroner asked that once a person's been pronounced dead, nobody is allowed to touch the body or do anything with the body. And there are interesting stories about how we have to bring people to Jesus about. That's the law. It's not some arbitrary rule that we've created. And the reason being is that sometimes the placement of a tube may not be where you think it is. And sometimes something might have more of a role to play in the death than what was originally thought. So that's why we say don't pull out the IV lines, leave the IV lines. You can clamp them, whatever you need to do, but leave everything there so the doctor can be photographed, and then the doctor can evaluate it each step individually so that they know exactly what they're dealing with here in this particular person.
Because there's always, I guess, the possibility that something that happened at the hospital contributed.
Right.
I guess.
Yeah. What the coroner euphemistically calls a therapeutic misadventure.
The doctor messed up.
Doctor killed him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which is not the case with Biggie, but that's
No.
in general. Yeah.
But it does happen, not very often, but.
Do you remember anything else from Biggie's murder? Do you remember anything with dealing with the media, or did you have to? Because by then you were the chief investigator.
But I think out the gate, I think LAPD put a security hold on the case. And back then, a security hold was a simple phone call from the detective saying, could you put a security hold on this? And we'd say, yeah, no problem.
And that means you don't talk to the press?
We don't talk to the press. We refer them to the law enforcement agency for any information. So now we require they go to court and get a court order sealing the case, because some media outlets challenged us on our security hold policy because it wasn't, in stone or whatever. It was simply a gentleman's agreement that we would not release information until the law enforcement agency had the opportunity to continue their case, develop their leads, and reach a point where we're all ready to start off on the same foot.
Right. One thing that jumped out at me about Biggie was they found no alcohol or drugs present. And of course he was a enthusiastic, weed smoker. And he's at a party that night where champagne is, everybody's drinking. It's interesting to me that his
what were the findings of the lab?
I think it was nothing.
Everything not detected.
The fact that, is marijuana on the list?
No, we don't generally test for marijuana.
Well, there you go. That's more what he was into, I think.
You don't die from marijuana, you die from walking into the bus.
That's interesting. So you don't check toxicology, you only check for things that can kill you.
Drugs of abuse is what we test for.
So there's cocaine on there, negative, of course. Alcohol, people can obviously drink themselves to death from alcohol poisoning. But marijuana you can't die from, so you would not test for that. That's interesting. I never realized that.
Yeah, unless you walk in front of a bus while you're high, it's not a cause of death.
Important. Yeah. Right. Okay, that makes sense. And if he was high or not, it had nothing to do with him getting shot to death. So.
Right.
So these are always interesting to me, the drawings.
The diagrams?
Yeah, and the diagrams. And that's page 22.
They come pre-printed with the human figures on there, and then the medical examiner will write in the corners or on the margins here, and they'll write down what their observations are, and they'll identify basically like by number, like number 4 bullet, number 2 bullet, and so forth. That will correspond with the dictation of the report into its final form.
Got it.
She also marks on the diagram the direction of travel for the bullets.
Right.
You see there.
Yep. This is interesting. So you have a vital signs here with what looks like times next to them. So it looks like the first vital sign on here, and this I assume is from the hospital, is at 12:46 a.m. And then the final vital sign is taken at, it looks like 1:12 a.m. And it scribbles by its pulse, and it looks like he just wrote zeros.
Yeah, it's just they've a 0 with a slash through it. No blood pressure, no pulse.
So he just arrived with no blood pressure, no pulse, and they never
Yeah.
got anything, it looks like, from that.
Yeah, he was in VFib when he got there.
What does that mean?
Ventricular fibrillation. It's the heart wasn't in its normal cardiac rhythm,
Okay.
and
So that just shows that he was, what they would say, dead on arrival in layman's terms, and they never got any vital out of him. They
Right,
never
that's
were
what it
able to
looks
get a
like.
pulse or anything at any point while they worked on him for close to half an hour. Wow. I see this as an intracardiac massage. Is that when they reach in and massage the heart?
yeah.
Wow.